Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Glad to have you with us. So we're here for the Logos Pro team presenting on Bible Word Studies. My name's Adam, and with me is Jacob Cerrone, and he is a PhD candidate with an emphasis in biblical studies. Jacob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a topic that a lot of people have a lot of interest in. This has one of been our most popular requests for this is what we want to be able to do in Logos Bible software. So we wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of get into the introduction of it. Now, myself, I am very familiar with the program, but I'm a layperson, and this is something that I've been trying to learn how to do myself. So that's why I've asked Jacob to kind of coach me through a lot of these things and help me learn how to avoid the common mistakes that new people make. Now, if you're already somebody who is familiar with the original languages and you want to learn how to use the software to do that better, don't worry, this is going to be for you as well. But if you're just getting started with Bible Word Studies for the first time, hopefully this will get you off on the right track. Now, to start out, we've devised a little game. Jacob, why don't you go ahead and explain what we're doing there?
Well, a lot of us, and maybe even most of us, have used Google Translate. It is a great tool, especially if you don't know a particular language. But I'm sure that you've also experienced when using Google Translate that it can be a little iffy. Obviously, syntax is a very complicated thing. Language is complicated. But some of the things that Google Translate also messes up is the selection of a particular gloss or a particular definition for a word. So we thought that it might be fun to emphasize how important it is to know the range of a word's meaning and also to pick the right definition for a word. So we're going to play a little game with Google Translate.
Okay, so what we've done is we've taken a few verses from Proverbs, some fairly well-known verses. Most of you will recognize these. And we've run them through several different languages in Google Translate. And your job is to guess what that verse is. So here's the first one.
We have, charm is false and beauty, but soon the fear of the Lord was a great woman.
Okay, I'll give you a few seconds to think about this. Now, get your thinking caps on because we're going to do a couple of these for practice, and then we're going to do one for a prize. So get your email out ready as well. If you have questions, you can also send those to webinars@logos.com. And let's check the answer for this one.
You guessed it. That's Proverbs 31:30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised.
Amen. So remember that for Mother's Day coming up here. Also, my sister's birthday is today. Happy birthday, Naomi. All right, let's move on to the next one here.
Here we have, iron metalize and one to each other and sharpen.
Now, when we were putting these together, I thought this was going to be an easy one to guess, but Jacob disagreed. So I'm interested to see how many of you get it. And let's see the answer.
Obviously, that's Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another.
Obviously, right?
Obviously.
Okay, so here we go. Get your email ready. This next one is going to be for a $10 store credit for logos.com to the first person with the right answer who emails webinars@logos.com. So here it is.
And for the money, we've got, what you do to the Lord, he is planning. Remember, send your emails to webinars@logos.com for a chance to win a $10 store credit.
And I want to encourage you that if you have any questions at any point during the webinar, whether it's about something that we covered or something that you would like us to address, please go ahead and send those. We love hearing from you at webinars@logos.com. We'll be checking that all throughout the webinar. And even for those of you who are watching this later on recording, obviously we won't be able to answer those on air, but we will do our best to follow up with you as soon as possible. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump on into it. I'm just going to go ahead and open up Logos Bible software. And if you have your program open along with me, feel free to work along. And I'm just going to start with 1 Peter 16 through 22. That's going to be one of our beginning texts. We're going to be going through a bunch of different texts today with a bunch of different words, but this is going to be our first starting text. In order to help us answer the question, how do you even identify what are the words to study? This is a big one for me because, I mean, it seems like there could be a lot of extra theological insight if I just knew where to look. And I don't always know, like, what are the words, what are the key words in this text that I should be looking for? So here's a few things to look for. One is repeated words, and especially words that are unique to this passage. So in your passage guide, which is one of the things that comes up by default when you enter a passage on the homepage, scroll on down until you get to interesting words. Now, this is sometimes helpful. It's not always. All it's doing is running a mathematical analysis of what are the words in this passage and how does it compare with the rest of the New Testament. What are some words that are showing up as unique to this passage that aren't as common to other places in the New Testament? And also, what are the ones that are repeated? So we have what the program thinks might be the most interesting words showing up the largest. So we have something like corresponds. Click on that, and we show a verse. We show conscience, and we have several others here. Powers, slandered. Now, on slandered, let's go ahead and click over to the passage itself. Another interesting thing to look for is when you click on the word or hover over the word that you might be interested in, you have the information panel here, and you have a lot of information that's embedded into that word. And many of these words are connected with a cultural concept. Now, if you don't have a Logo 6 package, or if you have one of the lower packages, you may not have cultural concepts. But if you do have that with the little speech bubble icon, this is an indicator that this is something that was important to the culture at the time that maybe is different in our culture. Slander in ancient times might have a different connotation from what we think of slander. Okay, so we're looking for important words, repeated words. Another way to show repeated words is if you have a Logos Now subscription. Logos Now, if you don't know, is basically the next generation of Logos Bible software, but on a subscription now. It's comes with a Logos Now membership, which has a lot of other benefits, but one of the main benefits is as our developers come up with new ways to implement tools in the software, you get those as updates right away. Every 6 weeks, we come out with some new features in the program. One of those new features is called corresponding words. And basically what that does is help me highlight when a word is repeated. Now, I'm going to choose same lemma. Lemma, if you don't know, means that is the Greek or Hebrew word. That is the dictionary form of that word. And we can talk about more about that in a little bit here. But just for now, we want to select same lemma. And when we click on a word, we then see everywhere else that Greek word appears on the screen. And conscience is the other one that shows up here. So this can be a very useful tool for showing up when words are repeated, and then what are some interesting words to look for here. And there's another one that another way to look for interesting words to investigate is how are they translated? Here in verse 21, we have that baptism now saves you not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience. Now, that word appeal, though, is very interesting. It so happens that this Greek word happens only once. This is the only time that it occurs in the New Testament. And for that reason, it's very difficult to translate. Again, over here in the information panel, we have the translation section, and we see that some Bible translations translated answer, a couple appeal, some response, and then in still others, pledge or promise. So this would be a very good candidate for trying to figure out, what does this word actually mean? How is it represented here? Now, obviously, this is a particularly difficult one, which is why it's translated so differently in so many different languages, or so many different Bible translations, that is. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but that would be a great one to follow up on after the webinar if you want some practice on your own time. Let's look for one other way to look for interesting words in order to investigate, and that's going to be in the exegetical guide. Again, that opens up by default when you enter in a passage on the home page, or you can also open it from the guides menu. And in the exegetical guide, there are a lot of different, and sometimes very in-depth tools to go into the original language. But for starting out, just take a look at the word-by-word section. And that's just what it sounds like. It's every word in the passage that you've entered and going through what are the words here and what are the definitions. And notice here, every word that comes up has a link to a Bible word study guide, a pronunciation, transliteration, and then a simple gloss, or a very simple definition of what that word is, along with links to the lexicons that you have with definitions for that word. And notice that in some of these words, I have more entries than others. I have, for example here, the Lexham Theological Word Book and the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. If you have any lexicons in your library that have the word theological in the title, theological lexicon or theological dictionary, that is an indication of a certain type of lexicon that focuses on what is the theological significance of this word. And as such, it gives a much more extended conversation, a much more extended definition of what is this word and how is it used and how is it related to other texts in the ancient world. But it's also more selective. They don't have this, it's not going to give you a definition for every word in the New Testament. And that's why you're only seeing those showing up in certain places. By the way, if you don't have those at the top of the list on yours, let me show you how I did that. Go up here to the library. And if you type in type lexicon, lexicon is just a fancy word for dictionary, but the type of resource in Logos that's identified as the lexicon, it specifically refers to a dictionary of the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic or even Latin. Okay, so we type in type lexicon and then the word theological to further narrow it down. Okay, here's the list of theological dictionaries that I have. And all you have to do is click on prioritize, and you see that I've already dragged those over into my prioritized resources so that those lexicons show up at the top of the list when they exist for these words. So that's a very simple way to see, this is a significant theological word. That's one that I'm going to want to pay attention to in my word studies. Now, don't go to open those lexicons right away. That'll be a shortcut to the system, but we want to actually put some work in. It's always better to do word studies when you put the work in yourself, although we're going to show you how to check your work by using these theological dictionaries and other resources by the end of the webinar. Okay, so let's talk about how do we actually do the word study? When we think of word studies, actually, I just got a technical note here. If some of you are seeing that the webinar is a bit blurry on your screen, hover over the video on the bottom right corner. There's a gear icon. If you can change that gear icon to a higher resolution, that should help for you. You might also want to make it full screen. And if you're following along in Logos, you can even pause the video and go back to watch the video as you practice in the program. Okay, so back to our first questions of what are we asking when we do a Bible word study? Well, the seemingly obvious question is, we're asking, what does this word mean? Now, we have a translation, obviously, and those translations have a team of scholars who obviously do a very good job. But we're trying to get into it a little bit deeper understanding of what does this word mean. The problem, though, is that words have different meanings depending on how they're used. So, Jacob, you and I were talking earlier about the English word fly. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word fly?
Getting on a plane and going to a different place.
Right, and I think of like a housefly. And last night I was helping my daughter with a package of Cheerios, and I said that I wanted her to be careful with the lid because I didn't want them to fly everywhere. And she said, "But they don't have wings." So obviously, there's a broad range of how the word "fly" can be used, and it all depends on the context that it's in. So the real question we should be asking is not just what does this word mean, but what does it mean here? What does it mean in this sentence? What does the author intending to communicate by using this word? And before we can answer that question, we have to ask the question, what can this word mean? We have to look at what are all of the different possibilities of the range of meanings that this word can have, and then decide which one fits in the context most appropriately. Anything to add there, Jacob?
No, that's spot on. Words have a range of meanings, and we always need to be aware of those ranges of meanings to make sure that we're selecting the right one when it comes to Bible translation and even when it comes to our own understanding of spoken language today.
Okay, fantastic. So let's look at an example here. Going back to logos, this is a guide I had open earlier. If you're following along with me here, you can just open the Bible Word Study Guide. And I've actually got one saved here for the word aphemi or aphemi, depending on how you pronounce it. To get this word, let me show you how we just type that in. Type the letter G and a colon, and then start typing the English transliteration. Okay, and here we have logos suggesting several options here that match what we've typed in so far. And we want to select this first one, aphemi, to forgive or leave. Okay, now I'm going to skip down here to the bottom first, because as I said before, when we are doing our word studies, what we most want to do is actually put in the work ourselves, because that's what is going to give us the deepest understanding, as well as give us the practice of looking at how do we see this in its original context. So the way that we do that is simply by opening one of these textual searches. So what we're looking for here, is what are the different ways that it has been used in the New Testament. Now, one way that you might want to start even before this is to look at your different lexicons. I'm going to choose just a simple one for now, the DBL Greek, Dictionary of Biblical Languages. And this is going to give me a list of different possible ways that it could be translated. So what I would want to do here is maybe have a Word document or a note file open in Logos and then list out all of these different possible meanings. And then go to my search and look at what does it mean in this context. And the New Testament, of course, is a fairly large body of writing, so we would want to break that down a little bit according to author or by genre. Maybe we would want to look at all of the Gospels together. Maybe we would want to look at all of the writings of Paul together and that sort of thing. And say, in here we have the devil left him. They left their nets. They left the boat. Jesus says to leave your gift before the altar. Okay, and then we have a totally different meaning here in the context of of the Lord's Supper, or the Lord's Prayer rather, Jesus prays, "Forgive us our debts, as we have forgiven our debtors." And 2 verses later, "For if you forgive others their trespasses." It's still the same word. It's still aphiemi, but with a totally different context and a totally different meaning because of that. So if you have the time, and especially if you can read in the original language, if you have both the time and the technical expertise, this is what you would want to do. You would want to go through verse by verse and look at all of these different examples and list out how many times is it being used in this meaning. Now, a lot of us don't have that kind of time, don't have that kind of technical expertise, and that's where Logos can really help here as well. So let's go to the translation ring in the Bible Word Study Guide. And here you can see everywhere that this lemma occurs, everywhere that the Greek word occurs, and then how the ESV translates it. Most of the time, a good quarter of the time, it's translated left or leave or leaving. And then a good third of the time, it says, it translates it to forgive or forgave, etc. Now, you can change the translation here as well. This is automatically picking from my preferred version of the Bible, which you can change in prioritized resources like we already did in the library for those theological lexicons. But if you're just curious, what do other translations have to say about this? You can easily change that here as well. So, for example, we can switch over to the NASB or the NIV, and it instantly loads up all of the same search for the same Greek word, but you see that the configuration is a little bit differently because the NIV translates it in a little different way. And you can see same thing for several other versions here as well. Okay, there's another section here in the Bible Word Study Guide that is also really helpful, or can be really helpful, for discovering what are the different meanings that are behind the text. So that is the senses. This is our own scholars here at Logos Bible Software at Faith Life have gone through the entire biblical text and assigned what do we think is the meaning that's being used in this situation. So often it's going to be very similar to what you have in the translation, but sometimes there's some important differences as well. If we open up to allow, okay, we have the ESV saying consented, but if we turn on the context menu or click on the word for the information panel, you can see the sense showing up here as well, that we've identified that this means to allow. And this is a way that we can search for all of the ways that of what it means, not necessarily just how it's translated. And this is, again, really important to identify. These are all, it has a different range of meanings. And it really depends on the context and how it's being used to identify what this means. In the Lord's Prayer, it talks about forgive, but you see that there's another sense here, to divorce or send away. In the context of 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is saying that a husband should not aphiemi his wife. Now, is he saying that he should not forgive her? Obviously not. This is a context where the meaning, it changes quite a bit based on what's being admonished here. He's saying that the husband should not leave his wife, should not divorce her. Okay, well, let's clear the screen here. I'm just going to pause for a second and ask Jay, do we have any questions that have come in yet?
I've not seen any yet, but be sure to send your questions to us, and we will be sure to try and get to them on air.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to clear the screen here. And you can do that. I have a little shortcut, but you can do that just by typing in close all. And I'm going to open up my ESV again and jump to 1 John chapter 4. Let's scroll up just a little bit to catch the tail end of chapter 3. Okay, so again, we're looking for repeated words here. I've got my corresponding words selected on lemma. And I've already clicked around in this passage a little bit, and I found this this word here, confidence, seems to occur over and over. In fact, it also appears in chapter 2, in chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5. He keeps coming back to this idea of confidence. Now, if you're familiar with John's writings, as I'm sure many of you are, you know that a central theme of his is love. But then he also ties it into this idea of confidence, the confidence that we have before God. So what does that mean? How can we dig into that a little bit deeper to find out what is the idea that he's representing here? So I'm going to right-click on confidence. We have the context menu opening up here. And if you're just learning the layout here, whenever you right-click in the program, you have all of the different kinds of information showing up here on the right. This is the same information that we saw showing up in the information panel when we had that open. And then over on the left-hand side, all of the different actions that we can do with that information. So here we have the Greek word parousia. And we have several different forms here. Now, I said that I was going to come back to this idea of lemma. We have the manuscript word, which is the way that it actually appears on the documents that we have, that we've discovered, that we've recovered from ancient times. But that's not the way that it's going to show up in a lexicon. Just like when we look up the word thought, for example, we wouldn't necessarily look up the word thought in an English dictionary. We would look up the word think, because that is the dictionary form of the past tense thought. Okay, so we would want to do the same thing here. We look up the dictionary form of the word, the lemma, and we simply go over here to Bible word study. And this is probably the one thing that if you're new to the program and you learn nothing else from this webinar, remember this. Right-click, go to lemma, and go to Bible word study. And you have the Bible word study guide opening up with everything that we've already talked about.
Before we launch right in, I do have a couple of questions from the previous segment.
Yeah.
I hope it's all right if I pause you here before we launch in. The first one is, how can I find all occurrences of a Greek word, either lemma or inflected?
All occurrences of a Greek word. Great question. Okay, so the I think I'm missing the last part, though, the either lemma or inflected. Maybe, Jacob, you can kind of interpret that for me?
Sure, I'll go ahead and help. So what you would do is you would open up the search, and for lemma, you would do the same thing that you almost do for Bible word study. If you recall, we typed in Greek G for that. Instead, go to the morph and then type in lemma, and then whatever Greek word you're looking for. So, for instance, parousia, you can start to type out the transliterated form, and you'll get a suggestion box right there. And then if you wanted to do an inflected form of that, but you don't quite know what the inflection is or how to spell it, you can always type the @ symbol. And if you know the part of speech that you're looking for, you can start to enter that in. So parousia is a noun. And you're going to look for whatever case you're looking for it in. So, for instance, the genitive. And then just hit enter.
Okay, so this search is looking for parousia specifically as a genitive noun, but the question is all occurrences, either lemma or inflected.
Right. So if you just wanted the lemma non-inflected, you type that. There we go.
Okay, so this is going to give, no matter what the inflection is, or if there is one or isn't one, this is going to return all of those results.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Absolutely. And the last question we have at the moment is, how do I get that information box to open?
Oh, yeah. The information box that we had over on the right-hand side is one that opens up from the homepage when you type in the passage here. That's one of the 5 panels that opens by default. But you can also open it individually from the Tools menu. So you click on Tools here and look for information. Oh, I lost it. There it is. Information here under Look Up. Okay, and now we have that information, so it'll load up whatever our mouse is pointing at. Great questions. Any more there?
That's it for the moment.
Okay. So I may as well leave that information box open for the time being. Okay, so we're looking at parousia. And so we want to do what we did before. First, we want to find what can this word mean. So let's quickly look at DBL Greek. And it has a simple definition of courage. Okay, and you see that it lists 2 different definitions here: courage or boldness, or confidence or frankness. But there's a second sense listed here, especially when it's combined with the Greek word en, meaning in public or openness in speech. So let's keep those 2 possible meanings in mind as we look at the text. Okay, so we scroll down here, click on New Testament. By the way, when you click on New Testament, it may open to only the Greek text. I've also got the ESV loaded beside it, and I've done that simply by typing in the box here. And we can change that to whatever text we want, as long as it's a parallel text to what we've searched for here. So we've got Greek New Testament. Of course, we need a Bible that contains the New Testament. Okay, so we're looking at several different results of parousia. And in the Gospels, he, speaking of Jesus, spoke plainly about this. So that obviously would be the idea of speaking openly. And here again, talking this time in the context of the Pharisees. Let's just pull this down here so we can see that result. Okay. So here we have some of the Jewish leaders saying that they are afraid of him, or afraid of saying anything publicly bad about him for fear of the leaders. Most of these references, as we go through them, we can see that most of these references of parousia are about Christ, where he's speaking openly and boldly. And we can see that perhaps more plainly if we go to the translation ring here in the Bible Word Study Guide. Here we see in Acts that the leaders have the same kind of boldness showing up in Peter and John. And with the rest of the disciples, that they were filled with the Holy Spirit and continued to speak the word of God with boldness, with parousia. Now, what about confidence? Confidence is the word we started with in John 3:18. And we have several other occurrences of where parousia is translated as confidence. Now, it's important to remember that this is just the translation of the Greek word into this particular English word. This is not all of the occurrences of the English word confidence in the ESV. This is only where confidence occurs as the translation of parousia. And we see that we have confidence in several other contexts here, several in 1 John, of course, but also several in Hebrews. I want to come back to that in just a moment, because we can also, it can also help us to identify what are the meanings of this word, or what does it mean when we look at other literature. So, for example, we could look at apostolic fathers, which is also written in Greek. Now here, of course, NIV translation is not going to help us, but we do have a translation of the apostolic fathers. Okay, here, so now we can see the Greek search, and we can also see it here in English. And here in Polycarp, let's go ahead and open up this result here. In the martyrdom of Polycarp, he is on trial, and he basically says to the authorities, if you vainly imagine that I will swear by the fortune of Caesar as you say, and you pretend to be ignorant of who I am, listen plainly. Parousia. I am a Christian. He's telling it to them plainly and openly and with confidence, you could say. If you wish to learn the account of Christianity, set a day and listen. So this is a context where he is on trial and he is standing his ground in the presence of an authority. And that's a really important idea. If we had time, we could also go through a lot of other resources where we see this occurring over and over again, especially if you have classical Greek resources, such as the free Perseus collection. You could go through and you could find multiple instances of parousia and find how it's used in all of those instances. You could also look at it in the New Testament Apocrypha. You could look at it in the LXX, which is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. And you could see how is it used in all of these different contexts. What I want to do is shortcut some of that by going back to some of our theological dictionaries.
I'm going to take a quick moment to pause. I see that some of you have questions. One of the most repeated question has been, I have a Logos 6 base package. Why am I not seeing corresponding words?
Okay, corresponding words is a brand new feature of the program that is currently only available as part of a Logos Now membership. So Logos Now, if you don't know, you can try it out and get your first month free. Just go to logos.com/now, and after that, it's $8.99 a month. And what that membership gets for you is you get some free preview to some resources. You get some special benefits for joining the program. But most of all, what that gets you is you don't have to wait for the next major release of Logos to come out to get the new features. You get them as soon as they're hot off the press from our developers. And one of those new features is corresponding words. So again, if you don't have that, go check it out at logos.com/now for your first month free.
And you mentioned something about the Logos Now package, and it is phenomenal. You do get every single one of the new features that we are developing right now instead of having to wait for the next release. But some of you might be interested in knowing that one of the free preview resources for this month is an archaeology mobile ed course. So that
I did not know that.
That alone is well worth the $9.99 that you would pay for the subscription this month.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, I thought I saw another question come in. Did we want to cover that one too?
Sure. Are we able to freeze the info pane? It moves all about.
Great question. Okay, so the information pane has several settings here. And you can find those just by clicking on the drop down. Actually, there we go. Okay, so on the drop down here on the upper left, you can choose whether to update on hover or update on click. So hover is the default. Like many of you, I found it a little frustrating that it would update so often. There is a little bit of a delay there, so you can move your mouse from one place to the other, and then it'll start to load on hover. So that's very quick if you want to get a lot of information in a hurry. But if you're a little bit more focused, you can choose click so that it only loads that information for the words that you're clicking on in the text. There's a lot of other settings here as well, which we won't get into all of that today. But if you're interested in seeing more of those settings, please send in those questions and we'll get you some more information on what those do.
And we'll take one more question for the moment before moving back into the regularly scheduled program. How do we access the Sent section?
How do we access the Sent section? Okay, so if you have Bible Word Study open, it is one of the default sections if you just keep scrolling down here. Now, that Sent section is currently available only in gold and up, I believe.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, so gold, if you have to have, it came out with Logos 5, so if you have Logos 5, gold or higher, you'll have that section. Or there's also a way to add that in with what's called the feature collection.
There's also another way to access the Bible Sense lexicon, not just in the Bible Word Study. Is there any way you can show us that?
Yeah. So you can just go up to Tools here, and under your reference section, you have Bible Sense lexicon here.
One of the things that I love about this in particular is that you get a tree that shows you the various concepts that are related with that specific sense. So if you click on one of the branches of that tree, as you see on your screen, you've got a number of different senses that are associated with that broader concept. So you can see how various words in the original languages relate to one another.
Okay, great questions coming in here, guys. Keep it up. All right. And where were we? We were about to look at parousia and the theological lexicon of the New Testament. Okay. So here we find that in Greek literature, the first meaning of parousia is political, the right to make one's own thoughts known, to say what one will. So it is a citizen's privilege. And this is one that comes up. If we had time, we could look through a lot of different Greek texts, not just the New Testament, but classical Greek texts, where we have the citizen demonstrating parousia in a place where he's on trial or he's speaking before authorities. Now, he always has the right to express his opinions freely in the marketplace. So again, that kind of reminds us of what Jesus was doing. He was speaking freely. He was teaching in the synagogues and among the people. And there's also this connotation of truth, that you are speaking in just plain honesty with complete candor or straightforwardness. Now, when you do that, when you speak candidly and proclaim the truth, it kind of exposes yourself. You kind of leave yourself open to attack from opponents. It gives you the idea of they might be putting obstacles in your way, and that's why you have this other nuance of the word that means that you're courage or audacious or confident, that you have a certain sense of bravery or courage that you're bringing with parousia. Now, there's all of these different senses now, and I want to be really clear here. It does not mean that when parousia is used, it means all of these things at once. That is a common rookie mistake that I've made before, and probably everybody watching has made at some point. It does not mean that it means all of these things at once, and it also doesn't mean that you get to pick which one it means in your text. No, our task is to try to decide from the clues what is the best fit that for what the author is trying to communicate. Okay, so let's go back to our text. We've got quite a bit more here. And I think most of you would have this theological lexicon in your packages. I'm using a platinum package today. So you may see some resources that I have that you don't have in your package. Another great resource is the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. And the fantastic thing about this one is it really goes into a lot of depth, not only of what does this word mean, but how do we know it? I mentioned the classical Hebrew text, where this occurs in the New Testament, and this really goes through all of those different examples and explains this is how we know. These are the examples that we can follow. So if you have the time and expertise to go through and look at all of those texts on your own, as I said before, it's always the better idea to do that on your own and try to come to those conclusions by yourself. But this is an important check on your work. This is an important way to see, are the conclusions that you're coming to correct? And we can even see here in the Theological New Testament, we have a section on Johannine writings. So let's go back to 1 John 3 and see if we have some clues that can help us discern what is the sense that it's being used in this passage. So starting at verse 19, it says, by this we shall know that we are... Actually, you know what? Let's start even a couple of verses before that, because this is a really important context. Many of you will be very familiar with this 1 John 3:16. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. By this we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure our heart before him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have parousia before God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. Okay, so why do we have parousia? We have parousia because our hearts do not condemn us. When do our hearts do not condemn us? When we keep his commandments. What are we commanded? To love our brother, to follow Jesus' example of laying down our lives for our brothers. Okay, so that's the context that we're given, that this is when we have parousia. So what does it mean before God? We are coming before God as an authority. We are coming before God openly and plainly, and in some sense courageously, because we know that our hearts are not clean. We know that our hearts, can condemn us, but God has given us a reason to know that that we can have confidence that he is greater than our heart. And we see that even more so if we scroll down and look at the next instance of confidence in John chapter 4. God is love, verse 16 now. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this is love perfected in us, so that we may have parousia for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. So it is God's love in us, his love that lives there, that gives us that confidence, that freedom to speak things as they are and to come to him boldly and with courage. Before I switch over to what the TDNT has to say, Jacob, do you want to chime in anything here?
No, that's very good. One of the things that's struck me about this particular word, and as Adam has warned already, we can't import everything that surrounds a specific word's meaning into that specific usage of the word. But what we see here, and what we even see in Hebrews at times, is this idea that we are before God, that we make our requests before God, and he is the ruler within this reality, our heavenly reality, and we have, as Christians, the ability to approach him, and knowing that we live as citizens of heaven, that we have that ability to approach him with confidence. That we don't have the fear of being judged. We don't have the fear of not having our requests made known to him, or of being simply discarded. But as we live out the principles of this heavenly kingdom here on earth, we have the ability to come to him. And it's not as if we get everything that we ask, but we do receive and have the confidence to ask from him according to his will and his desire. So thank you for pointing these things out to us, Adam.
Great. Okay, so as we said, it's important to do this work on our own and try to puzzle this and put it all together based on the clues that we find in the text. But then it's also just as important to then check our work against what resources, what scholars have already put out there. So we're going to switch over to the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, and we have a section here on Johannine writings. And I'm going to, again, click on the visual filters menu and look for the one that says emphasize active references. And basically what that means is if I have one of the references that appear in this lexicon entry, if I have one of those references open on my screen in another panel, it'll highlight that for me. So we could, of course, read this whole section, and that is a great thing to do. But let's see if we have any references to 1 John specifically. Oh, and looks like there is a reference here to 1 John, and for some reason it's not catching that highlight. Okay, so here the author notes that John distinguishes between a present parousia and a future parousia. We have a present confidence and we have a coming confidence, which Christians have in the last day, the coming of Christ before God, the judge and righteous. I'm going to see if I can find a better example to emphasize active references by switching over to the BDAG. BDAG is an abbreviation of the author's initials, BDAG for short, but the full title is a Greek English lexicon of the New Testament and other early Christian literature. So this is a great one to have because it not only focuses on words just in the New Testament, but it also broadens that to other early Christian literature, such as the Apostolic Fathers. And this is one of the highest recognized lexicons in the field. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of text here. We have 1, 2, 3 different definitions, along with some subpoints here. And there's a lot of a big block of text on the screen. I want to expand that out to outline formatting. Some of you might notice that some of your lexicons have this outline formatting to make it a little bit easier to read on the screen. In fact, you might have noticed that I had outline formatting turned on when I was looking at the Dictionary of Biblical Languages. Okay, and again, I want to go up here and emphasize active references. And as I scroll down, here's my reference to Polycarp. And let me actually just bring that over to the other screen. Okay, so I do have a reference here to 1 John 2:28 and 1 John 4:17. And when I have my panel open to that verse, you can see that that highlights there as well. Okay, and again here, just as we saw with the TDNT, BDAG is also examining the eschatological coloring, as it calls it, or that is the coming or future sense of parousia. There's a couple of other ways that we can also examine or check our work. If we go to the Bible Word Study Guide and scroll down, we have another section here from Logos Now called Lemma in Passage. And I just want to be clear here that this is only for Logos Now members. This is another one of those new features that you get as the benefit of being a Logos Now subscriber. And what this does is looks at all of my commentaries that mention this word. And I want to look specifically in the context of 1 John. And I can see what is the discussion of parousia in 1 John from these commentaries. And I can use this as a check against my own work to inform my understanding even further of how this is interpreted in this context. There's one last one here that I want to point out, and that is the exegetical summary. This is a fantastic resource for those of you who have it. This is one of our featured products today. And the benefit of the exegetical summary is that it doesn't do all of the work for you, but it does summarize what are the different possibilities of what this word means and what are the different both Bible translations and lexicons and commentaries that take different positions. So we look at parousia in 1 John 4:17. And we can see the different possibilities of translation. And then it also has really helpful questions of what is the relationship indicated by that or so that. And what is meant by having confidence on the day of judgment. And then it lists the different possibilities and the different resources that take that position. Really, really helpful, and can really help you understand the full possibilities of the text. Again, that's one of our featured resources today, and is also included in the Platinum Collection. So if you've got a smaller collection, if you've got a Platinum Collection or higher, congratulations, you've already got this resource. But if you've got a smaller one, then check that out. You can save a lot of money and get a lot of other great resources by upgrading to a Platinum package. Okay, and I think we're going to return now to any other questions that we have coming in. Jacob?
Yeah, for just 1 second, I know that one of the things that we talked about was some of the pitfalls to avoid. And one of the main concepts that we should get out of today is the fact that words have a semantic range or a range of meanings, and it is not okay to go and find all of the different ranges or all of the different possibilities and import them all on one particular verse. A great example of this that we did cover was Ephiemi. And that could mean to forgive or to divorce. And it sounds silly in this particular example, but it doesn't mean both to forgive and to divorce in the same context where Jesus says to not divorce your wife.
Exactly.
And we can't just pick and choose whichever meaning that we want out of thin air, because it would render that same passage quite silly to say that we should not forgive our wives. The context, the surrounding context, is going to be a very good idea, give us a very good idea as to what that word means. And another resource that you should really be aware of is D.A. Carson's exegetical fallacies, where he's going to go and walk you through each one of those pitfalls that you might not be aware of, such as appealing to a word's etymological root or its historical meaning, or to segment a compound word into two different pieces and then say that it means the sum of those two pieces. So an example in English would be a pineapple. We're not going to say that a pineapple is an apple that grows on a pine tree. That would be quite silly. Or a butterfly is a stick of butter that flies. These are very silly examples in English, but we do them all the time in Greek without being aware of them.
Right. And those aren't the only ones either. I mean, it's not just the etymology of the word that's an exegetical fallacy, but there are several other pitfalls that we don't even have time to talk about today. But this book is a fantastic resource for exploring those.
Absolutely. To get to some of your questions before we wrap up, one of the questions that we have is, how often are new features put into Logos Now?
How often are new features? New features come out every 6 weeks. And if, as a matter of fact, let me just pull up that page here. If we go to logos.com/now, it'll give you a good overview of some of the major features. We've organized your systematic theologies. We put in a new feature for multi-view resources, so you can see multiple texts in the same panel and save you space on the screen. Concordance, I think, is one of the most impressive new features of Logos Now. You can get the occurrences of every word in any text that you have, not just Bibles, but if you want to examine C.S. Lewis's works, or you want any resource that you have, you can put into the concordance and find out what are the most common words that occur there. And the list just goes on and on and on. If you're interested in it at all, I'd encourage you to check those out, as well as go to the Logos Pro pages. Jacob and I are both part of the Logos Pro team that are here to help you learn how to use the program and make the most out of your Bible study time. And we have a whole bunch of Logos Now training videos. Anytime there's a new feature that comes out in Logos Now, we make sure that we want to help you learn how to use that new tool as well.
Another question is outline formatting a Logos Now feature? I don't see it.
Outline formatting is a Logos 6 feature, although I believe it only is in certain packages. I don't recall off the top of my head what package is required for that, but I can certainly follow up with you offline.
And then we have another question. How are you getting the one instance of the word to select all occurrences of the word in the book? And a dovetail to that is another question about how corresponding words, which is what you're going to point out,
yep,
interfaces or relates to sympathetic highlighting.
Okay.
How are those two different?
Great question. Okay, so let's open up two texts here to the same, or two translations rather, to the same verse. Okay, now there seems to be a lot of interest on this, on the corresponding words. Now that's what we've selected here. Again, this is only part of a Logos Now subscription, and we have several different options here. We can choose same surface text, so that would be the English, or we can choose same lemma. So in this case, that would be the Greek. And when we click on a word, it'll highlight You can see the same English word now that I've got it selected is highlighting in pink. The same Greek word is highlighting in blue. And when it's both, it highlights them both overlapping in purple. Okay, so that is corresponding words, and that is part of a Logos Now subscription. However, there's another feature called corresponding selection. Now, you might know this by its old term called sympathetic highlighting. And basically what that means is when you have two resources that both have the underlying Greek text attached to them, as I do in my NIV and ESV, both of these have a reverse interlinear. I turned on corresponding selection, and whatever I select on one screen will also select on the other screen. So we can very easily see when there's a difference in translation.
Here's another question. Is the exegetical summary resources that you pointed out the same thing as the exegetical guide?
That is a great question, and no, it is not the same thing at all. The exegetical guide is a tool. The exegetical guide is going to load up all kinds of information that's pulling from the Greek text underlying your translation. And it has a lot of other tools in it that we have not had time to get into today. For example, textual variants. As you probably know, most of the manuscripts that we have for the New Testament and other biblical manuscripts don't come to us as complete copies. They come to us as pieces of copies, and some of those copies differ with each other. And those differences are called variants. And this will give you an idea of what are the different variations that are possible from the actual documents that we've recovered. We have grammars and grammatical constructions. Grammatical constructions, if you don't have that, also a Logos Now feature. We have visualizations and interactives. These visualizations have to do with the syntax, or here you can see a sentence diagram of how the grammatical construction of this verse exists. So the exegetical guide is a tool that pulls from all of these different resources. The exegetical summaries is a single resource in itself that's actually produced by the SIL, the Society of, I'm going to say,
I'm drawing a blank. I
think it's Society of International Languages.
Linguistics.
Linguistics, Society of International Linguistics. Yeah, they have actually gone through and created these books after painstakingly pouring through all of the different variations in interpretation and what are the positions that are taken by other commentaries and translations and lexicons.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I believe we've already gone 10 minutes over. Thanks for joining us. All the questions that weren't able to be answered during this webinar, we'll try to get to them as quickly as we can and email you. And I'm sorry I drew a blank on SIL. That's the Summer Institute of Linguistics.
Summer
Institute of Linguistics. I knew it didn't sound right, but I, for some reason, was drawing a blank. We have the coupon code for you for the mobile ed course. Is that correct? Learn to
yeah, we certainly do. If you've enjoyed this today, and I hope that you have, the Learn to Use Biblical Greek and Hebrew is a fantastic course. It's got 12 hours on Hebrew, 12 hours on Greek, and it does a lot of what we've done today, but in much, much more detail. It normally sells for $699.99, but I walked down the hall last week and talked with the head of mobile ed, and he really liked what we were doing here with the webinar, and he said, you know what? Let's give your audience a 50% discount. So use the coupon code WordStudy when you check out, and you can get that today for $349.99. We're going to leave that coupon code up for just a couple of days for you who are watching it on recording, but that is a fantastic resource that I don't want you to miss out on if you've found today's study helpful at all. You can also use that coupon code for $5 off any of our other recommended products. We've got several of those listed on the page. Exegetical summaries, and D.A. Carson's exegetical fallacies are two that we recommend, but there are several others that we've talked about today. And this coupon code will work for $5 off any of those resources. And I don't want to forget, we have the translation game. For those of you who are wondering what you do to the Lord, He is planning is a bad translation of commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. And do we have a winner on that?
We did have a winner, and we will be emailing our winner shortly after the webinar concludes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.